wealth or extra degrees actually provide no insurance against addiction. And depending on which ones we look at, there are particular ones that have much higher rates of addiction. So, for example, like female surgeons or young lawyers, they have extra degrees and they have way, way higher rates of addiction than the general population.
Welcome back to another episode of Doctors and Dollars. I'm your host, Nate Crannell. Today, we're going to be talking about navigating the psychological minefield. As we navigate, we'll talk about addiction, wealth, childhood trauma, and recovery. With me today is Dr. Daniel Hochman, a psychiatrist based in Austin, Texas, known for his expertise in mental health, particularly in addiction treatment. He's the founder of selfrecovery.org, an online addiction recovery program that focuses on providing accessible and affordable mental health support. Dr. Hochman's approach to treatment emphasizes evidence-based practices, integrative cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and motivational interviewing. He is also known for his educational work, offering courses and workshops aimed at both patients and healthcare professionals to improve mental health outcomes. Welcome, Daniel. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Nate. I'm great.
What's going well today?
We're below 100 degrees here in Austin, so it was a nicer morning than it was yesterday.
There you go. So I'm in Iowa, just north of you, and we're sitting at like 68 degrees at 11 o'clock in the morning. We're kind of enjoying. We're like, wow, is this fall? And then you look at the weather for this weekend, and yeah, it's 95, 96 degrees, and that's the Midwest. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. Now, at least we have a mild winter for it. I feel bad for places that still have a hot summer and a frigid winter.
That's all right. And we're recording this here at the end of August. Do you have kids going to school here shortly?
Yeah, they just started yesterday.
Yeah, mine start tomorrow. So a little bit of change in if you want to talk about psychology and all those types of things, just kind of that change in the dynamic of how your household operates on a daily basis. Kids are used to a more relaxed schedule, and now there's a little bit more regiment there. How did your kids take it yesterday?
They were noticing that, especially the older one. Like the party's over, the late mornings, relaxed days. It's like a little short grief process. Like goodbye, easy days. Damn it, back to teachers, homework, and rules.
Absolutely. I gotta guess your kids know what you do, or at least what your title is, right, as a psychiatrist. But do they understand, I guess, some of the treatments or what it is, how you help people on a day-to-day basis? And have they ever said, so that's question one. Question two is like, have they ever been like, Dad, don't play those mind games with me?
Yeah. Well, those questions have everything to do with each other. I really try not to say too much about what I do and my work. Not because I necessarily check work at the door, but, as they have questions, then they ask. So they do understand, even though I'm a doctor, that, sometimes I say to kids like a doctor of the mind or different things. And so they understand in general what that means. They know what therapy is. It still confuses them why I would have gone to med school if I'm doing mostly therapy now. And so I think there's still a little confusion, but not so much that they interrogate me about what I do. So year by year, they do understand more of what I do in this room, but they certainly don't grasp it at the moment.
Yeah.
And so to the second part, I have to monitor because I know a lot of people in mental health, we mess up our kids pretty bad because we're over sort of anticipating all the problems. And some kid was mean. Oh, well, we need to talk all about that. And where's that kid coming from? And you can drive someone crazy doing that, put way too much on their mind. And so there is a harm in doing too much of that. So I try to leave a lot of that outside the house. You have to remember people that come into this room are wanting to be here and ready and willing to work on something. If you bring that to other people, it usually doesn't go well.
Ooh, that's a great final thought there, because that's not where I thought you were going with that. But that's an interesting dynamic of it is not a two-way street when it comes to that. Like the street is one way, and it should be received at coming to you, not necessarily you coming to them saying, "Hey, let me take all the knowledge I have and bestow it upon you." It's
Yeah,
really should be it's not a give and take.
right.
That's a very interesting way to think about it. When did you kind of realize that was it once you became a father that it was like, okay, I have to find that line, or was that a mentor in the past that said, hey, once you have kids, uh, try and separate those two things?
I'd say it's a note I took coming out of med school, transitioning to actually learning like proper therapy in residency.
Mhm.
Um, I thought in med school, like if you just give people the right information, that they'll transform. So if you tell someone who's obese how to eat and just give them encouraging words and give them some kind of exercise regimen, like surely they'll adopt all these healthy strategies. And then same thing for depression. I was stupider than the next person. Just like, oh, well, you just got to get out, see friends, maybe volunteer, get some perspective, look at what's going well in your life, and so yeah. I mean, I I could wisen up pretty quickly in med school and see like none of that works, and
Yeah.
so it's taking notes from that, and part of that, among many things, is that yeah, the timing has to be right. You have to go. I call it like go in the right window. So um, if you just try and bash through to get inside the house, you're just like a criminal. You're going to be driven out of there. If you go in the right window, the right time, you have a really good chance of making an impact. So for my kids, do I try to teach them things? Absolutely. I mean, I try to share what I know about how people work with them, but when it comes up. So there's
Mm.
windows that open if you're ready to look for them.
Yeah. And I think just in that back to school theme, like, uh, is there kind of a level of coaching, or at least I know like my daughter is going into second grade. She was nervous last night when we did like the open house before she starts tomorrow, and it's like kind of helping them understand like, hey, there's structure here, and there's things that are good, and there's things that you're not going to like, but like this is a safe space, and the teacher's here to help you, and you can ask questions, and like kind of psychologically getting them in the right mindset of like, this place is okay. It's not home,
Right.
but this is a safe place to be. I think you can kind of bestow that upon them, but I think you're right. Like, hey, some kid is being a bully, or somebody says something mean. Like, until that happens, you don't want to be like, hey, just in case somebody says something mean, here's how you should handle it. Wait until it actually happens and be more reactionary versus proactive.
Right, right. And we use a term for that in therapy. We call that salience. It has to have some kind of
Hmm.
psychological relevance or salience for it to begin to matter. To where they're really ready and interested.
Very cool. What got you interested in psychiatry? I mean, you mentioned going to medical school. Kids wondering, hey, you're a doctor, but you're more of a doctor of the mind. Like, what
Hmm.
was there a moment in time where you either not just the time where you said I want to be a doctor, but what was that moment in time where you said I want to go down this path and this become my life's work?
I was really just down to the wire thinking I was going to do emergency medicine. So I was like
Hmm.
all in on that. I had done some volunteer firefighting, really, really liked that whole scene, got to ride on ambulances and thought, like this would be a wonderful career. So even in my fourth year of med school, thought I was going to do emergency medicine. By the time I did, I think my third rotation, like elective in it, I was already growing tired of the kinds of cases that would come in. You might be aware, but there's been a lot of policy changes in America that let pretty much anything walk in the door in emergency medicine. So it's not like a lot of people imagine, and so that combined with I was finding I was way more interested in understanding people's path to get there. Like what
Hmm.
began before the emergency, and it just sort of made me not necessarily even realize, but remember who I am, which is just I'm way too curious about the origins of things, to have done that. So psychiatry was sort of the obvious choice after I had to stop and think twice about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And now you've opened my curiosity window, because I have to imagine then, as you alluded to, the plethora of different things that come into an emergency room. I got to imagine that an addiction, right? That
Mm-hmm.
there was overdoses and things like that were coming in often. Your mind then, and what really gets you going is like, what got them to this point? What got them to the point of an overdose that they then come into the emergency room? Is that kind of what opened your door for addiction, and understanding how does the mind work to get them to an addictive state to then eventually end up in an emergency room? Is that kind of what led you down that road?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if it's a trauma case where there's just a tragic car accident or someone falls, things like that, there's not necessarily this huge origin question. And that was actually what I enjoyed. It was just like a pure, like, okay, something's broke and let's fix it. But then, yeah, I mean, a lot of what you see, people are leaving things, way too late. There are complications, infections, and things from diabetes. There's, like you say, the culmination of an addiction that's been going on for years. There's all kinds of other things where a lot of the cases, began a long time ago. They had many, many, many chances to have corrected, and yet, here they are in crisis. So yeah, that it bothered me to be treating like the very end results when there were a lot of missed opportunities there.
Absolutely. You kind of set me up for a perfect segue there, as you were talking about people had many, many different chances. So in the opening, I talked about navigating the psychological minefield. I kind of want that to be the theme of today, because obviously we all have a psyche, we all have different ways of going about life, but we all have that minefield of making I don't want to say good and bad choices, but choices that then reflect a different outcome, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. Talk to me just in your, and this might be a 30,000 foot view question, but like, help me understand what's going through the mind psychologically at the point when an addiction starts. So somebody maybe let's go what's something that people get addicted to pretty easily, like heroin.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody tries heroin the first time, whether it's they're in high school and a buddy says, hey, let's do it once. Maybe they try it once and it didn't really affect them. But when somebody starts to use that, and again, there could be it could be gambling, it could be sexual addiction, it could be, there's 1,000 things that we could be addicted to, but heroin, or for an example, what's going through the mind psychologically when that addiction starts, for someone to either go, as they're navigating now this minefield as a heroin user,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of those minefield points that they're challenging themselves with?
Yeah, well, so while we're already backing up to see, okay, where did the addiction really begin? Like, if we could try and put
Mm-hmm.
our finger on it. Of course, they're not usually single moments.
Mm-hmm.
But while we're doing that, yeah, let's back up even further, if we may, which is like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
someone who ends up going on to have an addiction, and we can even broaden that to just be, reckless use of something, or just too
Mm-hmm.
much. So not even necessarily, fitting criteria for a full addiction, but someone
Mm-hmm.
who has a real problem with a substance. The problem, really, if you trace it, begins well before they partake in that substance. And so nearly always in a chronic addiction, and just so listeners can understand, I differentiate recreational use of things from, what we would actually call an addiction clinically. So
Mm-hmm.
recreational use can still get heavy, it can still kill you, but that's more sporadic and for fun. Whereas someone with an addiction or ongoing reckless use, uh, that implies that there's something they're actually struggling with in an ongoing manner. Not just with the substance, but there's something driving that that's more ongoing and enduring than, well, when I hang out with these guys, I tend to get carried away. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so in that kind of addiction where it's more chronic, it begins well before. And what begins before? Um, sorry for being, a stereotypical psychiatrist, but it's always going to have to do with childhood. There's something going on. People nowadays are aware, trauma can go on to lead to addiction. But remember, trauma can also lead to PTSD and no addiction. So it's not just trauma. There's other features that are layered, things that happen or don't happen that determine whether someone turns to drugs, alcohol, or not. And so then the question is, well, so then what is that? And on a basic level, it's always a failure to be able to tolerate distress very well. So if you have, say, depression, anxiety, something that's throwing you off, right? So any negative kind of emotion, people who can tolerate that bad feeling then have that bad feeling. So you can be depressed and just tolerate being depressed. You may hate being depressed and not like it, but you can tolerate that feeling. If you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you've been traumatized, if you're angry and you can't tolerate that feeling, that's the perfect setup then for an addiction. Because then when you do turn to any number of vices, that vice is far, far more helpful and relieving than for the person that can otherwise tolerate the bad feeling.
Mm-hmm. Is tolerate, can I interchangeably use the word tolerate and manage? Because like when somebody has depression, if they can manage their depression and still have a successful career, a successful family life, is that managing the depression, or is tolerate a better word in that like they're well aware of it and they just are barely skating by? When I heard tolerate, that's kind of what I thought, is like, man, they're just right on the edge of something bad happened, but they're able to not let it pass that line, versus someone who maybe manages it. They had bad trauma as a child, but now they're an adult. They know they have depression, but they manage it well. Is that a fair assessment?
I'll answer through an example. So let's say someone grew up in a terrible environment, always poor, and that, power's getting turned off and everything. Okay, so then there's like fear, insecurity. They feel maybe less than compared to peers. There's a difference to me between tolerating and sort of being able to manage, which, manage to me implies they're like pushing through. So then let's fast forward, and this person is now well educated. They manage that feeling of insecurity by doing really well financially and, and saving money and investing. And so they manage a feeling of fear and insecurity by doing really well in the workplace. Whether that means lots of hours or just knocking it out of the park and whatever that is for that person. So managing can still help reduce the risk of an addiction, but much more powerful would be that you can tolerate that feeling regardless. So imagine how powerful it is that you feel insecure about your status, insecure about keeping the lights on, and even though your salary is $48,000 and your wife's not working, if you can still tolerate that fear, that is more powerful than behaviorally managing it. So managing and tolerating may functionally have the same outcome, but when push comes to shove, the tolerance for it will always win. Rather than like managing might in some cases mean compensating for it. And then if I use that word, hopefully it's kind of clear that, well, compensating for it is different than tolerating and actually resolving the feeling.
Yeah, so, great example. Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that. Yeah, that was good. How, in your experience, in the years that you've been doing this, when it comes to addiction, how often do you find, through those conversations, that the addiction started, or the genesis of all of that was, from a childhood perspective? I got to imagine you said earlier, that's really a lot of it. But how much of that childhood experience relates to wealth? Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say wealth and instantly the listener says, oh, wealthy people don't have addictions or they don't get depressed. They do, and that's okay. But I mean wealth just on a spectrum of extreme poverty to extreme richness. Mm-hmm. Like, anybody within that spectrum can have an addiction. How often do you see it? Addiction, wealth in whatever substandard comes, it leads to an addiction.
A lot. So there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
interesting things that happen in that process. First of all, just to address, maybe we could call like the background data here.
Mm-hmm.
Wealth or extra degrees actually provide no insurance against addiction. And depending on which ones we look at, there are particular ones that have much higher rates of addiction. So, for example, like female surgeons or young lawyers, they have extra degrees and they have way, way higher rates of addiction than the general population. So, so in general, we've actually seen, unfortunately, higher addiction rates with more degrees. And so the narrative generally circulating in the public is the opposite. It's the impoverished that have more addictions, and that actually isn't true. So a lot of people miss addictions in more, not just affluent, but like well-to-do people that seem to be really high functioning, but that sometimes just means that they're very smart and good at hiding or compensating. But yeah, so that's the background sort of data. But then, is there then some causal relationship? Well, people who are driven enough to acquire great wealth, whether that's because you got a lot of degrees, because you studied a lot, because you put in extra nights and weekends to get where you were, or you're just extremely adept at socially navigating and negotiating your way to acquire wealth through deals, through networking. All of those require a great deal of skill. And usually the people that reach the top are people who really pressure themselves. They have very high standards. And those are the kinds of characteristics that can lead to an addiction, where they are trying to deal with something that's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable to fail. It's uncomfortable to be subpar or mediocre. It's uncomfortable not to have like way more saved than you ever need. So there's discomforts that can drive us to the wealth that we have. And so instead of thinking of it like the wealth itself causes addiction or bad mental health, sometimes the very things that caused us to generate that wealth are still there, right? And so it's not necessarily the wealth that causes our demise, but it's the things that predated that, and it's hard to really shake those with wealth. And then there's a secondary layer. I mean, there's many, but at least to name the most obvious, when we do really well, at some point, we kind of have two paths then. Okay, so you're doing really well. Doesn't matter what field. It could be a doctor, it could be a high-powered lawyer, it could be a business owner. You're doing really well. Either you have an idea in your head that your value is through what you have been attaining. And that's a number of things, that you are now worth a lot because of the money, or that you're worth a lot because of how important you are or what you're providing, or just based on the number of hours and effort that you put in, right? People are placing a value on something about that, and that's part of what's driving them. So either things start working, or they have been working for a decade, and you only continue down that path further. And we can say, well, what's wrong with that? At least psychologically speaking, if that was originally coming from a place of either insecurity, feeling less than, feeling like you had to get back at people that had bullied you, or any kind of critique, naysayers, if you're doubling down on that path, well, then you're still just using a bad form of compensation for the original wound. So that's not helpful. And if you do that, you might find that if you're doubling down on working hard or networking, that's one more day you're not spending attentive to your spouse or your kids, or resting, and just being able to allow yourself to relax. So that's part of the inherent problem of doubling down on something to do with productivity and career. The other route is, okay, you killed it. You hit some milestone that you've been waiting for. Let's say it's $10 million. Now life is cake. Now I can sell the business. I can become more passive or be done, right? So any mix and match of either totally done or backing off work. Well, if you've told yourself for a while that your value is in whatever you had been operating with to attain that, and now you're not busting your butt, that's a very big challenge psychologically to lay off of. And so, some people just can't help themselves but start another thing, right? And so you're a slave to that. Or the other kind of, iteration of this, we could say algorithm of outcomes is you do sort of lay off the work and but become then hedonistic. And that's filthy for anybody, no matter how you grew up. You then begin to face new and strange and tricky dilemmas of, like, what do I do with myself? Who am I now? I was worker. I was, providing value. Now, who am I? What do I represent? What are my values? What are my ideals? Those are strange questions to start to answer, because then we're really just referring to history. Well, what do you do? What have you done? Oh, well, I did this, and so I'm done. Well, that's strange. We can't tell ourselves that forever. So yeah, I mean, when we're not pushing in life and we're not trying and we're not having to work through challenge, adversity, there's no journey and there's nothing that makes us feel alive anymore. That can lead to some real emptiness. And so I'm just kind of naming the hazards that are all around as you reach further pinnacles. There's all kinds of problems to look out for.
I am super excited to introduce to you the Doctors and Dollars 5-Day Financial Challenge. I'm Mike Neubauer, I'm CEO of Grand Vision Companies, and I'm the one that you see on the Wealth Wednesday and Daily Dollar episodes with Nate. So Nate and I are partnering again to do something even more exciting, which is the 5-Day Challenge. We're taking the best of all of our episodes, all of our expertise and knowledge, and we're condensing it into an impactful and purposeful 5-day presentation, 1 hour per day, for 5 days, to give you everything you need to build that foundation for your financial future. So if you're looking to gain the pieces, you want those puzzle pieces and find out how they fit in your financial plan, head over to the Doctors and Dollars website, join us on the 5-day challenge. We're putting it together for free, so you got nothing to lose. We look forward to seeing you on the inside.
Hazards, I think, is a great word to use, because, I mean, as we talked about at the beginning, we kind of want the theme of this to be navigating the psychological minefield, which is all hazards, right? But what I'm hearing you say is that it truly is multifaceted, in the sense that the addiction that we see today truly came from something much earlier, whether it was bullying or poverty or a whole display of different things that could have gone on. So then somebody could overcome that and to your word, compensate for it by attaining wealth, right? Maybe they had a lot of poverty. They said, hey, I don't want to grow up and be like my parents. I'm going to overcome that and compensate for that feeling of poverty or not having enough by having everything, right? Work hard in their career, build something great. Well, they put all of their self-worth on what it is that they built, right? That was one of the paths that you gave. And they put all of their worth in that. And so when they no longer have that, or that no longer satisfies that compensation mechanism that they've needed for so many years, then it's kind of like, what's next? And that was kind of your other path, is like, once you've hit that pinnacle or that peak, like, now what? Now I need it's almost like a void. As you were talking, I was like picturing walking up a mountain, and like, you've reached the top of the mountain. You're like, okay, now what? Well, now you're looking over the edge and you're like, there's this giant void. And I need to fill this in with something. And it's not going to be a career. I've already done that. I've checked that box. I've built something amazing. Now what do I fill this with? And what I'm hearing you say is that, like, often that's where the addiction comes from, is because that is the void filler on the other side of what they've been compensating for throughout their life up to that point.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that the addiction is just because there's like too much time on someone's hands and they don't know, sort of what to do with it, and it's only out of like that hedonism that you're on a yacht, getting wasted every day. It would be
Mm-hmm.
more that there's a lack of meaning, and that you're finally having to reckon with things, but probably not having the right idea or frameworks and understanding of what you're even facing. Because I see people like that, and they might frame it in their minds as I'm just bored. And it's like, well, yes, you're bored, but there's a lot more happening that makes this feel so terrible. And so it's having to finally reckon with certain things that can be very jarring. And hearing you also frame some of that, I want to add, because I want this to be relevant for a lot of people listening. It doesn't need to be that we were bullied or even traumatized in some way, or grew up with the lights going off. It can be with really subtle things too, where say you just have a lot of opportunities and you have a great burden of being expected to do really, really well. And that, well, I don't really have any excuses. I'm going to good schools. My parents support what I'm trying to do. They shuttle me around to practices, and so that too would be just a subtle version, and that can really weigh on people, and that pressure, it can still do a lot to someone, to feel like we've got to do it right and we have no excuses to be messing up.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think it is black and white, and so maybe I phrased it the
No,
wrong way.
no, you
But
didn't. I was just adding to that.
okay, yeah, that was a good add-on. Because the point you just made now makes me think of like, and I don't want to say everyone in this has an addiction, but like childhood actors who have a lot of pressure on them. They find success early in life. They put their worth on the work that they've done and the success that they're given and the attention that comes with being a child actor. Well, then eventually they get older. Maybe they stop acting. It seems to be in the news more often than it really should be, is like, oh, 34-year-old childhood actor, so and so, got busted, because of this addiction,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I feel like maybe what you just said, it kind of supports that idea of like, they were supported. They did have a lot of things growing up. They didn't have the poverty and the lights not turning on and an abusive relationship or something like that. But they had a lot, and then all of a sudden they didn't have it, and so it's like, how do I then? I can no longer compensate, right? And so how do I fill that need to have a worth? Do you think that my thought there is kind of in line with what you've seen?
Yeah, well, I'll just even add to how much harder it can be than that. Where, because to say the childhood actor, part of the problem is that they can recognize somewhere in there that they were granted that amazing opportunity, right? That usually their parents were jockeying for something, or something neat came up usually for them, where they were
Mm-hmm.
given that, and so that's very different than I've been struggling for so long and came into acting, I don't know, in my late 30s, when it's really an art form that you've been coming to for a few decades. And so to
Yeah,
be
good
just
perspective.
granted that from the start, and that's why we're talking about childhood actors in particular, there is a sense at some point that I have not really earned this. And people can say, oh no, but you're really good. And well, there do have to be child actors. And so, you haven't done anything wrong. You're really good at it. You'd have been, not employed a long time ago if you weren't any good. And you can justify all these things, but it's very hard to shake this idea of like, I'm here and I was just given this gift, but I haven't really earned it. And then, the most common analogous life to that would be someone who grows up with wealth already, right? So parents
Mm-hmm.
have already generated the wealth. I'm now growing up. I'm not getting abused. I get to go do whatever I want. We go on nice vacations. I've got great school. Let's say you even still do get good grades. Even if you're not getting bullied, and even if everything's going all fine and dandy in your childhood, I've worked in plenty of rehabs, and I can tell you they are filled with your well-to-do, you know, let's just call it trust fund kid, although they're not all trust fund, but something like that, just
Sure.
to build the character. It's filled with trust fund kids. And why? What's the opposite of what we're usually told? Is it like you won't have an addiction if life is just good? You have good job, family, and all these things. No, it's very far from that. What those people are missing is a real sense of their worth. And so, they really just don't know what else to do with themselves. And that can happen to us even if we've created our own success then. But it is even worse when that's bestowed onto you for no really good reason. You were just born into that.
Well, sure. So as you've been in those rehab centers, seen those from a character standpoint, the trust fund kid, what are some of the things that they're sharing? Like what are some of the, if we want to keep the minefield analogy going, like what are some of those hazards in the minefield that they're sharing with you? Is it like, I had so much expected of me because our family had wealth and I had to be this perfect kid? Is it I was able to do whatever I wanted and I made a few bad decisions that landed me in this position? Like, what are some of those psychological hazards that they're dealing with coming up through wealth?
Sometimes they do recognize that they had these pressures, and either explicit or implied pressure of like, hey kid, you're a Smith, and our family, is expected to do these things. So it's either spoken or unspoken, but the unspoken can still just be, look around, we're all achieving at a high level. We're getting you these experiences in the summer to help build your resume. We're sending you to this school because, well, of course, the implication is you're going to have to like do something good with this child. So implied or explicit, either way, sometimes they know that there's a lot of pressure. But I'll tell you what gets people even worse, like where it gets really dark, is when that child grows up and believes that because I've been given everything and I'm not achieving at some high level, or I am, but it doesn't feel like I'd like it to feel, it doesn't feel so satisfying, they ascribe that difference, that gap, to their own deficit of character. So like these things are all on the surface, seem good, and yet I'm depressed or feel empty or feel unwell or enjoy drinking too much. So it's got to then just be me, because everything
what's wrong
on
with
paper is so good and I'm screwing up or I'm feeling so bad. So that's just me. It is me as a person, like in my core, that is a failure and just not, I just don't work right. I just have something fundamentally wrong with me. And that gets very, very dark. That's a hard thing to shake when you really just believe that it's you. And a lot of people miss that because, they say, oh, well, all these things are going right and I still feel bad. What's wrong? And the answer is usually just to keep looking at more things that are going right. Well, see, look, I think if you just also go to the gym and, well, don't you realize there's these friends that you still have? And, well, I know you don't love your job, but, you could tweak this or apply for that and still be happy and do that other thing. It's like if the answer is to just tweak different things here and there, that you're kind of like adjusting a little bit to just stay or get happier, then you totally miss the point. There's something much deeper getting challenged for that person.
Yeah. So you as a psychiatrist, then how do you overcome that? Well, and it's not you overcoming it, it's them overcoming these beliefs and thoughts. But like, what does treatment look like for someone like that who has gone to that dark side? It's not just, hey, like really step back, look in the mirror, things are going pretty well, like you're okay, versus the person who has kind of gone to the dark side, for lack of a better phrase. Like,
Yeah.
It is me. Something's wrong with me. What's treatment look like in that sense?
Yeah, so we can run with that example where, initially they may have this simplistic understanding of themselves, which is that they're flawed, right? And that everything's going so right around me. So if I'm not happy, there's something terribly wrong. The first thing, and not first, just, one of the biggest things to keep doing is to actually entertain their idea. You can understand, you always want to understand where they're coming from, really what they mean. Like, really, what is this case you're making? So for example, they'll say, well, it's just me, because look, all these things are good. And then, like I talked about the windows earlier, right? Those people will generally open up a little crack somewhere, right? That, well, yeah, there was some extra pressure. Or, yeah, I wasn't really comfortable. Like, if I didn't feel well, it was hard to go to my parents. They seem to just always have these like simple answers, and it didn't work for me. So, they crack, right? And there's these little fissures, and say, okay, your parents didn't abuse you. They weren't mean to you. I understand then how you ascribe any deficit to yourself. But, if you didn't feel comfortable turning to them starting at a young age, might there have been something, not abusive, but, something that was missing there then, that you weren't made to feel comfortable with your distress, right? And this goes back to addiction, right? Like, if you're told, when you say, I feel bad, and you're essentially told, well, don't feel bad, or the other kids are dealing with that too, so that means, you shouldn't feel bad. It's like you have like a wrong feeling. Then you learn that your feelings are wrong and that it's probably not worth trying to express them. You learn there might not be recourse, and that's where there can, develop this bad pattern of not tolerating your feelings, because you're essentially told you don't even have bad feelings to need to tolerate. So you're fine, just keep moving. So there's things like that happen, right? And you find these little fissures, and so you have to crack those open and really provide enough complexity that their simple narrative in their head that they're just at fault here can be honestly challenged. Right? So I don't do what I call cheerleading. I don't just cheerlead and say, oh, well, I know you think you're so bad, but look, all these other things are going well. Instead, I want to know exactly what you think is bad. And if you say it's just you, what does that mean? Like, were you born that way? Is there something about your thoughts that you feel like is so different than other people, and this and that? So there's always more to understand with like exactly where that comes from. And so, if they provide that simplistic narrative, it's about providing the complexity and understanding maybe the burdens that were on them, or like I was saying, look at just little nuances about how they would have dealt with distress. And then I think a big issue that is important for us to name here is then with that wealth, you really remove very normal consequences in life. So what I mean by that would be, if you grow up and you're 17 and you feel like, well, I'm just going to probably do well because of the networking that my family has been doing, for 50 years, well, then there's not a normal consequence to getting a B or an F, or not finishing your first year of college like you wanted to. The consequences are somewhat removed because you're going to get hooked up with something anyway. And when you remove those natural consequences, we simultaneously develop a doubt about our worth, among many other things that happen. And so you can still be doing well on the outside, but develop all the while incredibly low worth and really doubt your capabilities, your skills, and your value as a person.
Yeah, see, this is why I wouldn't make a good psychiatrist, because then if you get to that point, that's where I feel like the cheerlead. I just naturally like cheerlead then to be like, hey, no, you do have the right feelings. Your feelings aren't different than everyone else's. You just are portraying them in a certain way, but then also kind of reflecting them in a different way. I don't know. I wouldn't do good at it. So that's what would make it hard, because I'd be like, cheerlead,
Yeah.
you are good.
Well, I used to. Just if only it worked to just encourage and cheerlead.
Yeah.
I also always assume, people have tried already cheerleading themselves. So that's another idea. So yeah, I mean, it's not to say sometimes encouraging words really matter, especially if they just don't have that anywhere in their life. So, cheerleading has its place, but in a professional setting like this, where generally cheerleading, has totally not worked, there needs to be something more substantive. And
Yep.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking, because one of the questions I wanted to make sure I asked you today was around, obviously we've been talking about wealth as a contributing factor to addiction, but um, like the education around wealth, and whether that's someone who doesn't have a whole lot growing up, but their parents teach them good money skills, or to the other end, the kid who's just given everything because they had successful parents. Like, what are your thoughts on educating children about managing money? Because what money is, and even though this is called Doctors and Dollars, it's I'm the dollars because I was a financial professional. You're the doctor, obviously. So we don't have to get into the nitty gritty of it, but really, I think what you said earlier about wealth being a big part of addiction, and even just in general life, money is a big thing that people think about, talk about, causes stress, depression, severe excitement. Like money does a lot, right? So
yeah.
if we can educate children about wealth early, how does that help them psychologically later? Is kind of one part of the question. Like if we can provide that education early, does that create better disciplines and better habits later? But then the other part of the question is, what have you seen as it relates to kids who were handed wealth, to our trust fund example earlier, versus what have you seen with people who still have an addiction, go to rehab, but they earn their wealth along the way?
Mhm.
How different are those two characters?
I mean, the end result might look the same, right? Is that they drink every night and still have problems with their family and stuff. So it can look the same on paper in the end, but as far as how they actually struggle, it can be completely different. And a quick way of describing that, some people have an addiction because they're very reckless. They don't have foresight. They don't think through what, this is going to do with that. And so they're really just high risk, reckless, don't think very hard. Other people have an addiction because of the exact opposite. They're neurotic. They're always worried that they're going to do something wrong. They overthink everything. And that feeling is so uncomfortable that they need to relieve it. So just a sort of quick idea off the bat of the characters that end up maybe doing the same thing can come to it from completely different kinds of characters, lifestyles, everything. Um, but yeah, with the education, the financial education in itself, I think, is really important. I mean, it's a shame, and I know there's part of your uh, thrust is like, what a shame when people don't understand like what to do with their money, how to think of it when you're leaving a lot on the table. And so education can make an enormous difference on whether you get to retire at 48 or never. So education is huge for the technical reasons of like understanding categories of money and buckets and what to do and what to do with your debt and all that. But then, what we're talking about today, separately, thinking about it in a totally different way is like, what are we trying to think of psychologically? And I think one of the biggest things to get ahead of in talking about money and thinking about money, whether from a really young age or just later catching up with, how we are thinking of money, is it should always be a means to some other end. So it should never be about the dollar amount, nor should it usually be something that is easy to transfer back and forth with money. Meaning, like, if it's like having 4 homes, that's exchangeable with money, right? So, like, whether you have $10 million or 5 homes, those sound really different, but they're also sort of exchangeable, right? There's like a clear transaction or, netting out that could be done. Whereas, for example, and there's like a prime example, like how your friendships are doing or what your relationship is like with your children, you can't buy that back and forth, right? That's
Yeah.
not tradable it's not really exchangeable. And so if money was going to be a means to an end, then you have to be careful about, like, it shouldn't be a means to an end of that I'm going to then acquire other things. The end still needs to be something very human.
Well said, man. I'm trying to think of how to like what my next question is there, because that was so well said. There's like that is, it's the antithesis of like to be human is, I don't know, is just to do good, right? And so money is a tool. I mean we preach that to all of our investors and our family office members all the time, that money is a tool. It, you said it perfectly. It's a means to a different end, right? And
Yeah.
so if what you want to do is spend more time with your family, do more, philanthropy, all these other things, money is just a way for you to get to that point where your true happiness lies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think money buys happiness, but it certainly buys the time to be able to do the things that you enjoy doing.
Precisely,
What are your
right?
thoughts
Like,
there?
listen to your wording, right? To do the things
Mm-hmm.
you enjoy doing, right? That's harder to think about just exchanging money for. And with my metric, right, of saying, like, the more exchangeable it is, probably the farther off we are on something that's like truly satisfying and meaningful. If what you enjoy doing, let's just say, is I don't know, going yachting. Well, there's aspects of that that are and are not this. So if it's that you can just buy a boat or buy a spot on a boat, that's closer to the exchangeable, and that also means it's closer to hedonistic, right? If your money is just buying ease and comfort, although that sounds nice and healthy, like it's self-care, or that, well, no, you deserve it. The closer it is to hedonism, the emptier that it is, and it's too exchangeable. And we won't be satisfied in the end with hedonism, which we could go into if you want, but I think most people inherently understand the emptiness and despair in hedonism. But if you're yachting and you want to enjoy yourself because you've busted your butt all your life, you do want to have like a comfortable cabin and a nice view, but you're really into birding, or you really want to visit all these different spots around the world and really want to meet people, and there's lots of things in your mind about what you're trying to experience and witness and exchange with people and other human things, feeling the wind and doing all that. That is further from you. You're not really directly buying that with money. The money is affording you to do that. It's a means to the end, but the end is something human, right? It's to be interacting in your space and really doing something that's special to you. So sure, the money is helping you reach that, but you can't like buy a conversation with someone in Croatia, right? You're affording the chance to do that, but you're not buying a conversation with a Croatian. Whereas the closer you get to, I just want this super nice bottle of wine in this really nice boat, that is buyable. And that's further from the actual experience that, you're trying to attain.
For sure. Yeah, we have a friend, or I guess just more of an acquaintance here in Iowa that I talk to him every now and then. He's a physician, very successful, but like he has a house out in Vail, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
He has a house down in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's like you look at it and you're like, okay, he just likes buying things. He drives a very nice car here in the metro. And so on the surface, if you saw him, you would say, okay, he just likes things. Like he makes good money, likes to spend it. But when you actually sit and talk to him, he's like, no, I have a bunch of buddies from college. We all like to golf. They've done well for themselves. A couple times a year, we go down to Scottsdale for a week and we golf and we have a great time and we reconnect. And that gives me an opportunity to do that. My kids grew up skiing. We love going out to Vail. And like my favorite time of the year is going to Vail with my kids and now grandkids,
Mm-hmm.
and skiing with them and hearing their stories about how their lives are going and stuff like so. Like he was the first person I thought of as you were telling that he buys things, like the money affords him to get those things, but truly he does those things so that he can spend time with the people he cares about the most.
Yeah.
and money got him to that point. So uh, I think that's a great way to look at it. And I honestly asked my question earlier just because with our Grand Vision Family Office, which is physicians and successful business owners, that entrust us with a lot of their wealth planning and estate planning and things like that. Part of our structure is education. And that leads to, we want to educate your kids to understand, okay, here's the planning and everything that we did while your parents were active in their careers and through retirement. But as we transfer this wealth to you, we want you to have the proper education to be able to, not let it dry up and then, within one generation, right? We want it to continue on. And so my worry when I was asking that question was like, are we doing the right education? Which I think we are. We're setting the baseline and creating those habits. But I think now I have a different worry in that you said that like money is one thing, like money is one piece of what can create an addiction. There's several other factors throughout their childhood and early adulthood that are not money related that I have zero control over them.
Yeah.
And that Grand Vision as the kind of purveyor of their family's wealth, like we just don't have control over a lot of factors psychologically. And so we're kind of a safety net within the minefield. I'm going to keep with this minefield analogy because I love it. So it's like, as they're navigating this minefield of life, like we can be a safety net for a moment for them to get their feet up off the ground. But like, there are so many other hazards out there that I have zero control over,
Right.
With these physician families that, you're really making me think like, oh, we got to kind of think about our education piece, which I think is great, but like, there's other things in there outside of money that maybe we can help with.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you can do a lot of things that are more in your lane and appropriate, like put guardrails up and stipulations on how money's transferred and at what age and all these things. But what the intangibles that are more complicated are, can you make sure that a client is responding well emotionally to their child? And if their child, is saying, I had a bad day, and it's, well, you have a lot more than I had growing up, but that's damaging, right? That's a miss. And you can't control those little things that are happening thousands of times in the home that end up, having different paths.
For sure. How do you balance those conversations? I know we were talking about school and things like that earlier, but you have 2 kids, just getting into activities, married. Like, how do you balance that work life to make sure that you don't miss some of those pivotal points? Kind of the intangible things, that aren't money. Like, yeah, you can buy your kids stuff, but like the intangible things that make you a great dad, a great husband. How do you make sure that you don't miss some of those steps along the way so that you're not looking back 10 years from now saying, wow, I did not do that well?
Yeah. One thing to kind of teach here is I think it's important for our words to match our behavior. So I can try and tell my children, so, maybe they see that, I'm a doctor. And again, without me saying anything, the implication is, well, mom and dad, really were driven, studied a lot, they're smart, and, and they've achieved at a high level. And so you should too. That I don't ever need to say that. And I'm saying that with my life. So now if I tell them, hey, don't worry, kids, which I try to do, like try in school, but like whatever grades you get, you get. Like don't worry, you don't have to get straight A's. Well, I can say that, but it doesn't necessarily match if I'm pressuring myself still in my career, as if I'm trying to get an A, but just at this age and like, achieve some really high level. And so, you have to be careful that it matches. And so one example of what I mean would be, I'm not trying to be the department chair. I'm also not, I finish, my hours are 8 till 4. That does still let me finish admin and things after that. But, so I am trying to match my behavior with what I would say, which is like work is not everything. That's not where I'm deriving all of my value. It's where I derive some of my value. So I can say that, but I need to match that in my actual work hours and also the quality of how I even describe my day, so that if I'm saying it's not just about grades or prestige, then my words, I can't just command them that. the quality of conversation at dinner needs to be around something meaningful about the day, not will I impressed people, or hey, I was given this award or told I was special somehow, right? Because then our actions every day would be, contradicting what we're trying to tell them they should live by. So that goes a really, really long way. But then with children, I mean, the nice thing is we have every day to keep changing and adjusting, because we have a lot of time to recognize when things are off and nudge them. So yeah, I mean, whatever we're doing is not going to land and keep them down what we think is the middle. We're still going to find that they had thought this, or they took what we said or did to mean that, and so we have time to always correct those things. But yeah, we should always be checking ourselves. That, like, if our child comes away with some distorted or bad idea about how to live or themselves or how to conduct themselves, they're acquiring those ideas from us and somewhat from their friends and surroundings at school. But we better assume it's a lot of us. So whatever ideas they have, like a very good parenting tip here is assume that they're learning something from you that led to that. And so we should always be able to have enough humility to assume that we're playing some part in what we're seeing.
Absolutely. I think you saved the biggest takeaway for last. I think that's the best way to wrap it up is that thought, and that, if we want to keep the minefield analogy going, like, everybody has a psychological minefield, but when it comes to your children, like, you're kind of you're their Sherpa, right? Mm-hmm. You're holding their hand, you're leading them through the minefield and saying, hey, look at that over there. Here's how we handle that. Hey, here's a good way to manage this hazard over here. And they're seeing your behavior interacting with that hazard. They learn, right? Like, that's all they're doing is being a sponge. Okay. And so the minefield is treacherous, right? But, like, if they can trust that you're the one guiding them through without a bunch of hiccups, it builds them into a very well-adjusted adult. Mm-hmm. If their parents are well-adjusted as well. And to your point, actions matching what their words are.
Yeah, and just to lob in here at the end, almost none of us are all that well-adjusted.
No, that's what as I'm saying that, I'm like, man, I have some things that I need to talk to my wife about when we get up.
Yeah. Oh no, I mean, we all need a lot of adjusting, and mm-hmm. and as soon as you think you're well-adjusted, that can sometimes be a real problem, because it usually means you're missing something. So,
mm-hmm. To be fair though, if maybe there's certain aspects where I don't feel well-adjusted in, could that then go back to my parents and when I was walking through the minefield as a child, and maybe the way that they taught me or how I watched them manage things was because of how my grandparents did things. I mean, there's the generational walk through the minefield, if you will.
Yes.
And it all just trickles down.
Yeah. And there is, if, listeners can think of things in a little bit of an artsy way, is like the money is carrying things. And so, mm-hmm. the money may be carrying people that came before you's anxieties about security, or it might be carrying mm-hmm. arrogance and better than, or narcissism. Like, the money is some symbol, and it carries things, and we have to be careful about what it means in our family and what's being ascribed to it. And so yeah, we have to be kind of careful about what we're touching.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Hochman, I appreciate you taking some time out of your day and speaking with me. I truly do look forward to when our paths cross again in the future.
Yeah, me too. And appreciate the time you're spending on this.
Absolutely. Take care.